the pale blue dot.
Thanks so much, Cynthia, for coming on the show. I wanted to start off by just giving the listeners a bit of a brief introduction to who you are. So if you could just carry the mic for me, that'd be radical.
Excellent. Well, I've had a lifelong fascination with like reality, ideas, consciousness, even since I was a child, because I had a feeling that I was already existed before I was born, and everything seemed like a dream to me. So my view of reality, I came to realize, is quite different than most people's. But I also socially acclimated to my family, who felt really weird to me. But my path forward then became one of following science, because my dad loved science. He really emphasized that. So what I ended up doing is majoring in physics at UC Berkeley. But then, because they didn't really have a consciousness studies department or anything like that, I would watch these PBS TV shows called Thinking Aloud with Jeff Mishlove. It was a big deal in America at the time. Well, not really a big deal, but I mean, I was a little on the fringe, but
big deal for you.
Yeah. So I then proceeded to get an MBA degree. I was still trying to fit in and do things kind of, that would make my parents and family happy. But eventually I had a huge Kundalini awakening that put me back on track for living a more spiritual life, more focused on what really matters. And then for the last 20 years, I've been focusing exclusively on tracking the nature of consciousness, looking into quantum consciousness, working with conferences that get to like the hippies who saved physics. I work with those guys, and doing life coaching. I've got my radio podcast, and most of all, I've got a website that I put everything on. That's realityshifters.com.
Wow. Lots of questions. I mean, the first thing I remember, Bill Maher said it once, and he said, talking to someone that's interested in both spirituality and science is as bizarre as hearing the term gay Republican, which is, that made me laugh a lot. But yeah, because I'm sure you must get that question a lot. How does spirituality come into science?
Okay, that's a good question. It's kind of a secret. I love your analogy, because it is a kind of a closeted thing. You'll find most people who believe in God, who believe in spirit, if they're scientists, it's very embarrassing to say that publicly. So I know a lot of scientists in private who definitely do believe that, but they don't want to say that because it looks like it defeats their science. Because science, the study of science as we know it so far, but this is about to change. But the way we know it so far, it's all about what can be measured. It's about hypotheses. So you've got your, some sort of an idea of what might be happening, and you test it by running some experiments. You believe in these assumptions that we've made about science, that you can be perfectly objective, and that what you're thinking and feeling will have no influence, no effect whatsoever on the experiment. There are no such things as non-local effects, et cetera, et cetera. Well, where I'm going with this is, thanks to quantum physics, this is all changing. So I think there are people like these hippies who saved physics. They are very spiritual. They actually care about, I'm sort of clumping them all together, grouping them together, but obviously each person is their own individual. But like me, they care about what's really going on in terms of consciousness itself. How does that have an effect? The frustrating factor with spirituality, and the reason it's still in the closet, is we still don't know. There's still no agreement. And this is like more than 100 years after quantum physics came on the scene. So it's frustrating, but it's exciting.
So for someone that completely has no idea about anything that you just said, as though you were just speaking Chinese, could you define what quantum physics is, essentially?
Okay, well...
if you can.
Yeah. So physics is the study of things and, effects, and the way that the material so-called building blocks of our reality work together. And so quantum physics supposedly was just going to be investigation of the physics of the very, very small, so that we could work out the common principles in effect that operate on these tiny building blocks. Again, I'm using this term building blocks. The big shock happened when people looked inside the atom and they found, okay, we've gotten it down to the nucleus. We've got protons and neutrons. We've got electrons buzzing around. So these electrons, these are quantum particles, meaning it's a quanta. It's indivisible. You can't break it down any smaller. Other example would be photon. And once you get there, there's nothing smaller. And so, like, good, we're making progress. The shocking thing, though, was that these indivisible little quantum particles, they sometimes act like they're building blocks, something physical you can measure, you know where it is. Other times, they smear into a wave function, and that's where it gets exciting.
Yeah, look, and when I was researching quantum physics, because it just was so hard for me to wrap my head around, but I went deep. I tried to go deep, and I looked into the double slit experiment, and there was that idea that, the particles, when you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but when you shoot them from through something to another side, they kind of, permeate and act more like a wave, where you can kind of tell the probability of where they're going to be, but you just can't pinpoint it. What does that essentially mean for the bigger picture?
Okay, well, that double slit experiment, first of all, that's been called one of the most classic experiments in all of science.
Wow.
And that doesn't mean that now it's all clear as a bell and we know exactly what's going on. No, scientists like things that illuminate what we don't know. And so, in a sense, that is still creating wide open questions. So the implication is huge, because part of that double slit experiment has to do with the way that the observer, the scientist, would be able to actually influence the outcome of that experiment based on whether they happen to be looking at one of these slits to see which one the particle, the photon, is going through. And so if they have a particle detection device in one slit and they know where it is, it no longer creates that diffraction pattern that looks like two pebbles falling in a pond with the little waves that constructively and destructively interfere with each other. Those little ripples and waves of choppy water. So those concentric rings, the patterns don't show up, and instead it looks like you threw paintballs of light through one particular slit. Mm-hmm. So as soon as the scientist is looking, it's like the particles know, oh, the scientist is looking. We better act like particles now. And that's the part that kind of is nerve-wracking, to put it mildly, for scientists, because remember, the assumption has always been, since Western science began, that we would never have any effect. We can be objective. And now that looks completely shot, which I think is a good thing, because many people felt like that was never exactly correct to begin with.
Yeah, and it's certainly, even just speaking out in a general fashion, the idea that we're born, and then we're separate to the world, you're separate to matter, and then when we die, that's the end of us. It's just a little bit, it just doesn't really make much sense, considering we're all made of compiled stardust that essentially came from something that happened that we can still kind of see in the galaxy 13.5 billion years ago. Sorry, in the as far as the observable universe goes. It just doesn't make much sense. I mean, but this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I'm like, okay, it doesn't make much sense, which as far as I can tell, but there could be a whole lot of things that I'm missing here, So how does, from that experiment that we were speaking about before, where it's, we think the particles do something, but it's only when that we observe them that we see that they actually do something, and what they were doing before we observed them could be something different entirely. How does that relate to the spirituality and the consciousness concepts that you were speaking about before?
Good question. Well, for me, and I think for most scientists, immediately what we start noticing is there's some kind of a connection going on between this the observer that was supposedly just some objective observer and the particle. So it's very implicit in built right into the experiment itself. Obviously, there is a connection, and furthermore, we see other evidence of forms of entanglement. That's the very scientific word for this. Not just with the particle and the observer, but with groups of particles can be entangled with one another. So the implication is huge. No longer can we so readily say, well, I'm just alone in the universe. I was born alone into the world. I'm going to be alone and I'll
Mm.
die alone. That's not really at all ever what's happening. We're so much more interconnected with everything than we probably ever fully realize. That's exciting. Then we're getting back into the spiritual side of things. Yeah. Which is where the quantum physics takes us, or seems to take us. Obviously, there are scientists that would like to pull this back apart, pull it apart. It's like, no, we can't go there. We can't say these things. But for those who say consciousness is primary, consciousness is fundamental, and even Max Planck, the founder of quantum physics, said things like that. So there are a lot of people that believe, in fact, the founders of quantum physics believe that we are connected, that this is extremely relevant for our lives, not just for the field of physics.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can almost see that, I mean, the beautiful thing about science is that it always tries to prove itself wrong. And that's why we've gotten so far in such a short amount of time. But for scientists that, as you say, want to try to pull this back and say, no, we are separate, if they're always trying to prove themselves wrong, does that not act a little bit hypocritical in that fashion? Like, what's the agenda behind wanting them to be so certain of a classic Newtonian world?
Yes, what I feel is going on at this point is we've run almost as far as we can go with Boolean logic, and we're sort of hitting the wall, just like we are with computers, that we can't make things any smaller than we already have without getting into quantum effects. And as soon as we do that, we've got quantum computers happening. And as soon as we've got quantum computers, we can't ignore the fact that there are these entanglements and so forth. So I think the logic has to change. We have to be aware of something that the Eastern, because I keep talking about the Western logic, but in the East, they've got things like fourfold logic, which has a lot more to do with the way that nature actually works. So it's not just our familiar categories of true and false, black and white, so forth, but instead it's a recognition that there's true and false, not true, not false. And that's much more similar to these quantum wave functions that exist in basically a superposition of states. So we don't know what state they're in, and it effectively creates sort of this wave function, this blur, this field of possibilities. And that's what quantum computers are going to be working with. That's what nature already works with. That's what we're already working with. And the way we think, is being proven that our decision making and the way our memory works have very quantum processes. So it's very, very quantum. It's not Boolean. And people have been thought to be illogical. We're not illogical at all. We're quantum. So we take into effect relationships and the way things affect each other. That's very quantum. And our computers will be using that logic. And I think that's where our science needs to go. As far as what that looks like, I don't think we've seen that yet. So that's a good question.
Well, it's I mean, nothing. Look, and I always do try to play devil's advocate with everything because it takes me so bloody long to understand anything, And nothing that you said there is completely out of the ordinary. I mean, like everything has an equal and opposite reaction. Like, we are so subjective, and what my truth is completely different from what your truth is, and it's interesting that people are so against this idea. Do you have like a fundamental reason, perhaps, as to why there are some well-established scientists out there that are so against the idea of quantum physics, with that idea that consciousness changes things? And yeah.
Well, I don't. It's hard for me to get into that mindset, but I can kind of empathize with it because there's a desire for humans to have a sense of control.
Yeah, good
of
point.
course, we believe that we have free will. I'm not against that at all, but some people would further like to know we can control the experiment. We can control the effects we're having. If we don't have control, then it's crazy. How do we know what's really happening? How can we prove anything? How do we know that some scientist isn't just telepathically aware of our experiment and therefore influencing it? We're in the realm of the crazy. So that's what the detractors would say. It's like, this is insane. You can't measure it anyway. There's no definition for consciousness. If it is primary, what does that mean? How is it already there? How, what good is any science then? So I think there's sort of that feeling that science has done so well so far with Boolean logic, with a very they consider it a Western rational approach. They'd like to keep that. rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I can
Yes.
understand that.
Yes.
But I think we have hit the end of the road. Personally, I don't think we can go much farther with this Boolean logic, classical thinking in a quantum world, because fundamentally everything really is quantum
Mm.
at every level of quality, not just the very small. And I think that's what people are starting to recognize when they look at the theory of everything. They want to bring astrophysics together with quantum physics, and then they realize, okay, but if quantum physics effects are occurring on the cosmic scale, and occasionally we can expect to see evidence of it, that's a little freaky for some people. And again, they're going to say, that's crazy. We don't want that. We can't believe it. There's no proof of that. They'll say things like that. And
Mm.
I can sort of empathize with that.
Mm. It makes perfect. I mean, you can see that side because it is scary. I mean, we have two minds, don't we? We have our evolutionary mind that wants to keep us safe and comfortable and protected all the time, and then we have this other mind that's almost like this has this existential calling to be connected to something greater than ourselves, and we're in this weird state where we can't seem to reconcile the two of them. It's very interesting, but you have to think as well that because something that I was looking at over the past couple of months was looking back through, what the sacred texts talk about, and Carl Jung was very big on alchemy, which is obviously very outdated now and all that sort of stuff. But before Rene Descartes came along with that whole mind-body dualism, the alchemists really perceived the world very much like with what you're talking about, where if they were trying to make the elixir of life and all sorts of things, what was going on in their own mind was very, very it wasn't so separate from reality as what we call it. And so I guess that kind of leads on to my next question, which is how do you define spirituality, and where does spirituality come into this? Because this is very interesting.
Well, how do I define spirituality?
Yeah.
For me, it's about meaning. Yeah, it's to me the sense of when something matters, when you feel like it has relevance for an individual. To me, that is spirit. To know the essence of who you are. When you ask yourself, "Who am I?" And you meditate and you observe. Okay, I'm observing the one who's having these thoughts and feelings. I'm observing who's having this kind of a bad or good day. Looking at all that. But then if I'm the observer, what's that? Well, that's spirit. So to me, spirituality gets into that sense of observation of the observer, that awareness
Mm.
of being aware. I think that's the key to it. And then what I find instantly happens is what you touched on, where we have that feeling of being part of something much bigger than ourselves. That really matters. And personally, I love to feel that there's a goodness to it. I like to feel that there's this sense of conscious wisdom, love, beauty, knowingness that is so vast and so connected to all that is. So for me, that's what this feels like, and we can give it names. For me, when I look at religions, they often are like blind men and the elephant. Each one is touching a piece of it, and so we've got the perennial wisdom traditions that bring forth a lot of that and start pointing out, look at this. You can see a commonality with these different spiritual paths, and I think there's truth to that too. But this grand hidden order which exists, this spirituality, this framework, to me it shows. I feel that I am infinite, that I am eternal, not in the human body, but the I am presence that I can be aware of. And I think we all have access to this. So it's to me it's exciting. It helps show the way that no matter what things may look like, we can find a solution for anything, and that to me makes it worthwhile, relevant, and practical. So it's
Mm.
not just some lofty ivory tower spirituality, but it's everyday. It's the way we move through life.
Yeah, and the good thing about that is that you know if something adds meaning to your life, it's not it's not like a blind faith idea where, oh, good, there is a God, so I don't have to do everything because God will save me, yada yada. It's that idea that spirituality, in your very individual way, has given you a way to do all and be all that you could be. So it actually gives you almost this little spring in your step to go nuts and actually explore things. Um, that can only be beneficial.
Right. Hopefully.
Very true.
I think when people use it when it's not beneficial, it's like a dead end trail. They just haven't figured it out yet.
Mm.
So they're trying to get a short. Often, because of hubris, people can be very proud, and we can think like, I've got this figured out. I'm in control here, and that goes for a while until it doesn't go, and then you realize, oh, oops. so so I think eventually people will come back to a greater, kinder, better viewpoint, which is more encompassing. Yeah.
So talk to us about some of the work you're doing then.
So what I'm doing is mostly life coaching at the moment, and occasionally giving talks. I'll be giving a talk for Institute of Noetic Sciences. They have lots of little groups. It's an organization that was started in California by an astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon.
Wow.
And then the association and organization itself, although based in Petaluma, California, is actually worldwide. And so people have chapters. There are lots of them in California. So I'll be going next month to give a talk about quantum physics and spirituality, actually, because that group of people is very interested in this topic. And like you said, it's kind of a very select niche of people that love both of those. Because sometimes you find people just want spirituality or just want quantum physics, but it's fun when it comes together. So I enjoy that. And then I've got my radio show, my Living the Quantum Dream podcast is getting back up and running. Took a little bit of a break last year. Just did a couple of shows, but I'm getting back into it again. So that's fun.
That's great. And who are some of the people that you get on your show?
Well, I've had, from England, I've had John Joe McFadden talking about life on the edge. So I like to bring on a scientist who talks about like the quantum biology, which is a brand new field. We're going to see quantum physics sneaking into all of the sciences, whether they like it or not, and upsetting apple carts everywhere. So John Joe McFadden was on that bleeding edge. He was one of the first people years ago to insist that he was certain that there were quantum phenomena effects happening in photosynthesis and other areas. And eventually it kind of came to the attention of Seth Lloyd at MIT. And he said, really? Well, we can prove it or disprove it if you want to test that out. And so Seth Lloyd did some calculations, computations, and created a mathematical algorithm that actually did prove that quantum physics is working indeed in photosynthesis. And the other areas are not quite yet proven, so it's still a little dicey, contentious, lots of arguments, and scientists getting ruffled feathers. but I like that stuff. So I had him on the show, and then I had Jerome Busemeyer on the show talking about quantum models of cognition and decision making, which is where he calculated again with lots of formulas exactly how you can prove that our minds and the way we make our choices have a lot to do with quantum physics. So I love that stuff. But I also bring on authors talking about things that to me are obviously part of this quantum connectedness that we all have. So that's the framework for the show.
Great. And so I wanted to just to bring it back again and really hit this idea with what we're talking about on the head, because I probably just realized that I went super deep into it, but for someone that is not very well versed in what we're talking about, it could be a little bit complicated. So how can I formulate this question? What is the implications for the layman essentially with this work?
Well, I think there are lots of what you might call takeaways, where you could recognize that we are, as I said earlier, connected, that you're not alone, that even if you think you're alone, just the fact that you're observing something is probably changing it. And now that may freak people out a little bit, but you don't need to get upset. Just do your best to keep a positive attitude and keep a positive perspective, because probably what you're looking for, you're going to find. Yeah. And so that's one of the huge takeaways, and that's a real elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Really? Wow. It's amazing that no one wants to talk about that. That would, like, if you go out and see what you want to see, essentially, but that's so true. And that causes a lot of people anxiety and things, we do that. You do go out, and if you're scared about something, you do attract that. You just start to see your world molds around that. I mean, a strong case can be said about the news.
Right. I know. And then some people will say, well, you can't change everything. But what I've been tracking with my website, Reality Shifters, that's exactly what I was tracking to begin with. That things were absolutely changing. That I'd be looking at something like my keys, or, you run a load of wash in the laundry, and it's a common experience to notice that you don't get all your socks back out of the dryer. So these sorts of things are indicators to me that something's going on, that there is a consciousness effect in all of reality. And those are the kind of books I write too. I haven't written one recently since Quantum Jumps, but Reality Shifts and Quantum Jumps are two books I wrote about this very subject because it's life changing. You can take these ideas from quantum physics and recognize that you can turn your life around. You can look at your own beliefs and listen to your self-talk, the kind of things that you're thinking over and over again, and you can actually take them out, write them down, flip them around, so kind of create a healing belief to override and cancel out the destructive ones, and you can literally turn your life around quite effectively. So it's very practical.
So yeah, there's actually a social psychologist in Texas, I think, James Pennebaker. I think that's how you say his last name, but he does a lot of work with linguistics and story writing and trying to release old traumas and things. And you're so right. We are, because of our primitive mind, we fall ill to the habits that we've created for ourselves, and sometimes we need to take ourselves from that perspective and just have a look at the kind of program that we're living in, and that's very, very practical. How does quantum physics come into that?
Okay, well, that's a good question. And some people, of course, are going to argue it does not. It's funny, we were talking about skeptical voice. It's the first one I'm hearing, like it does not.
Yeah.
Obviously, it does. Okay. Well, the way I would see it is that remember that thanks to the observer, what they call the observer effect, looking at that double slit experiment, and if you're looking exactly at the slit, you can tell which slit it goes through, and then you've got particles. Well, the same thing's happening here. So obviously, when you're able to observe what you're looking for, in other words, with something like a belief, here's where the dichotomy arises, and physicists are going to be quick to say, that's psychology. We do not deal with psychology.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. So if you just sort of go into a gray area with us here today, it's not exactly physics per se, but you can recognize the principles still apply. Because if you have a belief, then this becomes, in psychology, an operating field. It's kind of like this is your context. This is how you see yourself and the world. And to break free from an existing belief, there's a process to it. It's not easy for people to suddenly bust out of a victim mindset, for example, when they're fully vested in it and they see the world that way, that they are a victim, there's a persecutor, maybe a rescuer has come to them. They're thick in the Hartman drama triangle, and they're fully ensconced in it. So to make a breakout, that's a process. Usually.
Yes.
It involves, finding maybe there's a way to stretch their story so they're more than a victim, and then kind of by degrees get out of that drama triangle and break their way out. So the quantum physics of it, I would say, you can make an instant jump, but from the psychology side of it, that can be quite shocking. And you could have a psychological break, which we don't really recommend. So it's better to, when you've got a belief, work your way out by degrees is what I would recommend. So it's possible to do it with quantum physics. I don't recommend a huge jump unless you're psychologically extremely strong and you don't mind ending up in a really different reality where you're very different, everybody's different, and it's possible, but it's shocking. So I'd recommend go slowly. This is a weird area where physics and psychology come together.
But it does make sense. It's funny, Henry Ford really made that whole specialization thing in the economy big, where it's like, you do this, you do this, you do this. And then we all separated each other and we got anxious and depressed. But now we're getting so intelligent in all our separate fields, they're kind of starting to mold and convolute and all that sort of stuff. And you do see why I'm very interested in psychology, and that's what I read a lot and get a lot of my content from. And you do see how people start to play the victim card because they go through an experience that's so psychologically damaging that to not play the victim card would be to creep out into that unknown again and potentially have to go through that again without. And the reason why that happens is because people they don't formulate a plan from it. Something so bad happens to them and they don't know what to do, and then they freak out and the emotion's trapped without cognitively processing it, and then they never go back to that experience and figure out, okay, if that happens again, what do I do? Do I stand and fight, or do I run away and flee? And then we get trapped and we start telling ourselves this story of the world's dangerous, the world's dangerous, the world's dangerous. Then before you know it, you're in that little that potentially detrimental program we were talking about.
Yes, exactly. I like what you're saying. So I'm looking forward to the time when we've got psychophysics or
Yeah.
physiopsychics, whatever.
Yeah.
It's gonna be cool. But in the meantime, yeah, I love it too. I love the psychology. I'm looking at like how do you break free from that victim mindset, and it's such a big topic right now. We're seeing like the Me Too movement and everything. So it's I think it's very relevant for people to find ways to help themselves feel confident in that unknown. In quantum physics, we see the unknown as fields of possibility.
Yeah.
So it's like these are possibility wave functions, and everything is out there. And to a person who's been terrified and frightened, that's not a very calming idea. Sometimes people want structure. And so I can see why the patterns that we're familiar with are the ones we fall back on, because we're already, we think we know, like, okay, I know how to be right, I can be the victim, I can be like, I was victimized, like, okay, and the rescuer can be good, like, I'm good, I'm saving people, whatever. But then when we start seeing through that, like, okay, that's okay, it kind of serves a purpose for a while. When you need that kind of structure, it's there. But then when you break free further, then where are you? You're in the field of possibility. And so maybe by knowing that people can play with it and be safe there, that's what I like to do, is to show people you can be safe there. You can ask questions like, how good can it get? Which steers it in a good direction, because on all levels of your being, you know what good is. You're not going to mess it up.
Absolutely.
You're just going to say, like, how good can it get? And if you need that, you'll get what you need. And you can start trusting that exciting process. But it gets into things like the Mandela effect, where people are noticing on a collective social level that reality is shifting and history is changing, and facts are not staying the same.
Very true. And facts are, especially like what you said with that Me Too movement, facts are different from different perspectives. Someone says they were assaulted, another one says it's just a night that didn't work out in the end. It's very interesting. But I think overall there are always these big. I didn't know this was going to get political, but there are always these big shifts and movements. At the individual level as well as the social level. And I think the good thing about social media is that it's given everyone a voice and everyone power. So, obviously there are some people in that Me Too movement that have taken it way too far, but then they're kind of bringing awareness to the idea that everyone has their own truth. And we can kind of now orientate ourselves forward with the idea that none of us want to be a victim, but let's all kind of work together and make ourselves better for ourselves and for everyone else as well. So taking them out, it's just hopefully it doesn't become too damaging for other people who never meant to make people victims, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Politics is a huge area, and so you're right, that would be like a whole other show.
Yeah. I know, it's classic.
Oh my gosh.
So when did you, so you went to uni, when did you start studying quantum physics?
Well, I started really at UC Berkeley. That was in the 1980s. And so I had a great professor, Professor Clark. He was from England and did a lot of good work. We all thought he should get a Nobel Peace Prize or something. And I had Professor Trilling, a wonderful professor. And recently, I've been in touch with Professor Yasunori Nomura, because I like to look at the field of physics, what's still happening, what's going on, what are the top theories. And Dr. Nomura is working with the Large Hadron Collider, and he's worked with Alan Guth long story short, he's one of the people trying to put together an idea of how can you bring the cosmos together with the very small, the
Wow.
quantum. And so I was able to tell Dr. Nomura that in my reality, when I wrote the book Quantum Jumps, he did not exist. Which you can't say that to a regular person on the street and have them not be like, "What do you mean?" You know, like those are fighting words. What do you mean I did not exist? But Nomura, he just got this smile on his face, like, you know. And then I realized, like, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that. And I said, well, people have told me that a lot. I've heard it from a lot of people. They know for sure that they would have seen me if I did exist in their previous reality, and they know I did not. And so, but he already got it. He was already right there. So
Mm.
that was cool. So I think that's I get hope from that, from the new generations of people playing with Minecraft. There's a quantum component to that game, so we've got people learning to think in a quantum way. So you've got building blocks that are quantum, they're entangled. So you might be building a city with bricks, and the bricks are all gold one minute, and then they're brick another. They can change, and there's teleportation going on, and all of those kinds of ideas from quantum physics are built into the world. And so when we've got people thinking that way, and that was intentional, that game Minecraft was created with the quantum module precisely because we need engineers to develop quantum computers, quantum software, and think in terms of quantum logic, which we haven't done too well at with our traditional university training. Because even the quantum physics class I took, it wasn't teaching us how to think like a quantum, like in that quantum mindset. It would basically give you equations to solve, you know, talk about experiments, but to get into the mindset itself, that's amazing. You know, that's getting into the basically like the way God thinks with the universe, which is what Einstein wanted to know. All of our top scientists want to know that. You know, what is God thinking?
Wow. Well, since we're on the topic, what is God?
Well, to me, it's unknowable by any human standard. There's no way we could actually say with certainty, we've got it boxed in, defined, and we're using our little human words to describe it. No,
Yeah.
I don't think so. Not going to happen. So it's got to be always bigger than and more all-encompassing than anything that our senses can show us, that our mind can comprehend. So I think it's essentially unknowable. But at the same time, I think there's a sense for me of being supported, loved, nurtured, that there's a sense of ultimate goodness. All the qualities I would most care about that are most meaningful to me, that's what God embodies. So,
Mm.
so at the same time as I can't describe it at all, it's ineffable. It's also got all this goodness. So
Sounds a lot like pantheism almost.
it could be seen that way, but that might also be a mistake to say that's all it is.
Yes.
Anytime you say, "Oh, here it is," I think you've slightly missed the boat somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like good try, really nice, but probably there's more to it.
Yeah, well, I think, and then St. Thomas Aquinas said it was like the idea of God is way bigger than any human can understand.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So this is just it is quite mind blowing to have a scientist talk in these ideas. It's very very interesting. I love it at the same time. Where is the collective quantum world taking this? Like you mentioned before, teleportation as well. Could you get into that? Like that just seems like something out of Star Trek.
Yeah. Well, sometimes if you look at some of the weirder things that have happened metaphysically, I love metaphysics because then you hear these bizarre stories. Sometimes it's from saints, sometimes, and they try to downplay it like that didn't really happen, you know. We're not really levitating. We don't really smell like flowers. You know, we don't just instantly heal things, but they do. They teleport too. And so, you know, it's very interesting. So you've got these very humble spiritual adepts who are having these astonishing experiences, really downplaying it like that didn't happen. Nobody saw it. But yeah, it did. You know, they're witnesses. And then you've got people like you're talking about, the alchemists, and then the Taoists, you know, the immortals. We've had people around the world on the trail of, you know, how do you do this stuff? How do you work with, you know, inner ki? We've had Nate Kung masters that would like to work with that inner energy in the body and transform the world with it. So there's been a lot of exploration of it. But as far as teleportation goes, there have been some astonishing experiences. Sometimes with children, there were some famous stories in Italy hundreds of years ago where a couple of young children just kept teleporting. The parents were getting flustered and trying to keep them in the house and bring them home. This is very well documented. They'd bring the children home. I think that they were getting into a very theta state of mind, and this is before cars were common. A couple people would have cars, so that tells you what must have been the early 1900s. But these children, these two boys, would just suddenly be hundreds of miles away because they don't want to be home. And I think they were just feeling like it'd be fun to be over there. Boom, they're over there. And their parents
Whoa.
have to go collect them and bring them back home again. So this was well documented. There have been some other really trippy cases of teleportation. So what we're saying is this is a quantum phenomenon.
Wow. Yeah, it certainly.
A quantum particle teleports all the time. It's quantum tunneling all the time. Bless you.
Thank you.
But then when you get to be big, like a human, it's not going to happen as often. So the fact that it was happening relatively often is extremely unusual and interesting. But having said all that, I do hear from people who are teleported to safety when they're about to crash their car or a car is coming at them. And they just say, like, wow, something saved my life. Must have been an angel or God, or I don't know what it was, but I was standing in one place 1 minute and then I was 20 feet away. I didn't jump, I was just in a different place and
Whoa.
it saved my life. And I lots of people where that does happen.
Wow.
And they often don't want to talk about it because how do you describe this? And people say like you're nuts. That couldn't have happened.
Mm. I know, but it's interesting because like nothing, everything's impossible until someone does it. You know, even like
Right.
we've all seen Usain Bolt run, but 20 years ago that was impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, things are changing. Our technology is constantly taking us forward. So, but and think people want the technology. I think to teleport. They want quantum technologies to be here, sort of. I mean, there's also a lot of fear about what does that mean. How will this change everything? And I don't know. I'm not a technologist. I'm more looking at it from the internal side.
Of
And I
course.
believe that we'll find our way through just fine if we stay positive, keep asking how good can it get.
Mm.
Really, it's going to matter more and more to focus on that to help steer everything in a good direction.
Well, we survived the Cold War, so I mean, you know, how much worse can it get? We always find a
Let's not
way.
ask
That's our
let's
DNA.
ask good it can get. How good can it get?
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely right. Yeah. And that's another example of how we're always tilted towards the worst case scenario when even just by
Yes.
writing it down, even just by writing down the future as opposed to always thinking about the past can be so beneficial, even from the psychological perspective. I was talking about that psychologist before.
Yeah, exactly. And leaving it open so we start feeling a little comfortable with the uncertain, with things that are a little unexpected. That's hard. I mean, I know it's hard for me to feel like positive even when things seem like it's all falling apart. But that's part of the spiritual path, and it can become part of the quantum spiritual path too. Just knowing that well, it looks kind of bad, but just hang in there because something good's going to come.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So, just on that note, then, with your life coaching business as well, what sort of suffering do you see the most? Do you see people that are suffering existentially? Because this is something I'm writing about. I'm really fascinated at the moment. Is it existential suffering? Is it dealing with past traumas? Is it not knowing who they are and what they want to do?
The thing I see a lot of is just kind of tangled up in themselves, which I don't know where that fits in your model, but it's very much the thing of their head is in one direction. Like, look, like they often tell me, I want to change the past. I made one small mistake. I want to go back and fix it. You did a video about that. And so they're kind of they're seeing it differently than what I meant it as, and it's very interesting because they're very fixated from here in their head about what they think they want. Their heart is in some other place entirely. Their heart's not even in that, and they're not aware that what they care most about, they're not even aware of what they most love. They haven't felt that, so there's a denial of that. And perhaps most galling and most problematic is they have no idea what they need. But when these three things are all at odds, then it looks to them like random events are occurring. To me, it's obvious you're always going to get what you need. And so if you don't even look at that, well, there are going to be some surprises coming, because you have
Mm.
no idea, but it'll come. because you need it, so it's coming. But you can listen to it. We can learn to listen to that subconscious. And I love how you brought up Carl Jung. Wow. There was a master, not just at understanding the inner subconscious, but the collective,
Yeah.
and looking at those archetypes and how does it connect. And wow, that's big, because we're social animals. We do work collectively, and sometimes when people don't understand that either, if they could just understand it, then they wouldn't say the things they do. Like, I just want my little world to work. Like, well, have you thought about the collective? And how do you fit there? No. Like, what do you need? Don't care. What do you love? Doesn't matter. I'm fixated. Like, oh boy. So I see a lot of that, and people often don't know they're doing it. So it's easy trap to fall into. Our Western culture, it sort of propels us in that direction. And yeah. So I see a lot of that, and just various versions of tangling up. But most of the people I work with are meditators. Quite a few of them actually are life coaches, psychologists, and they want to go deeper. They want to know how to listen to those levels of themselves. So before a session, I meditate and I tune in and I get what's coming through for me, and I share that with them. So that we can go as deeply into that as they want with that shared awareness, which can be quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Gee, I love it. Probably got to finish up soon, but I've got this really, I think, important question that I want to finish on. And if any of that was kind of, firstly, where can people find you? Because that's important too.
Yes, the best way to find me is my website, realityshifters.com, and it's pretty basic, because you can then find where I am on Facebook, YouTube. I've got my monthly newsletter, so if you feel like you'll forget about me, just sign up for the newsletter and you'll get a monthly reminder, like, oh, that's right, he's doing that.
That's good.
So that's the best thing, I think.
Great.
Yeah.
And what about some practical tools for people that aren't well versed in this stuff but just want to make a positive change? Where can they start?
I recommend just introspection, meditation, even just a couple minutes when you fall asleep, when you wake up. Just take some slow, deep breaths to your lower abdomen. Practice releasing all tension. You might think you wake up and there's no tension at all. Just check and see where you are. Be observant. And if you're shocked to find, wow, I'm waking up and I'm tense. What is this about? Well, that's good to be aware of. And then just get into the practice of bringing some relaxation into that moment. And you can also, I would recommend, when you first wake up, I love that time to ask, how good can it get? To put myself in service to the highest, greatest good. Just notice how your day goes differently if you remember to do that. And be a little bit of a scientist yourself and see where that goes. So that would be my biggest recommendation.
I love it. I think introspection is so good. It just puts the power in your own hands to be like, wow, like, who am I, and who do I want to be in this life? Like, who do I want to be when I'm 85, 90 years old? What kind of life can I look back on? It's it is a little bit overwhelming to think how good life can be, as opposed to what I think I need to do.
And it might be different than what you've been told as well, because you might think that, good means that. It means I've got all the fancy car and fancy clothes, and I'm hanging out with the Kardashians. But then you ask yourself, do I really want that? Like, no. So then you have to find out, what do you really want?
Yeah.
So it's not what it looks like on TV or the magazines or whatever. It's different. So what is it?
And how
different than anyone else's.
Yeah, and how do you go about finding what you want?
That comes, again, I love Carl Jung for this too. It's just learning to trust this conversation that you can engage in with the universe, with yourself, just getting comfortable with that language of symbols, of that deep resonance. I think he's just the best at explaining that. I think he really brought that forth. So I think that's the key. Just, and if you don't dream, then sleep a little bit more, be good to yourself. I think dreams are so important, and daydreams too.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's I've just pumped through his stuff over the past 6 months. It's been fascinating. I love one of his things he said is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but whatever you did as a kid that made the time flow into seconds, or the hours flow like minutes, therein lies the secrets of your earthly pursuits. And it's so true. It's like, what makes you feel like there's no such thing as time, that you could just do it all day, every day, and it wouldn't even matter
Yeah,
to you? That's a good starting place.
that's super good. I agree.
I love it. Well, Cynthia, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was awesome.
Well, thank you, Tom. I've had a great time. A lot of fun. And
It was
really
great.
brightened a dreary day. It's gotten darker over here. I know it's daytime, but it's getting darker because we got storms coming in.
Oh,
So you
yeah.
really brightened the day for me.
Yeah,
Thank you
very
so
true.
much.
Very true. Well, that's good. And I won't. Have you already had your morning coffee, or are you a coffee drinker?
Yes, just having a little bit right now. Thank
Good.
you.
Good to know. Good to
Part
know.
Swedish, so yeah, we do coffee.
Very good. Good. All right. Well, thanks very much, Cynthia. I'm sure I'll speak to you soon.
Yes, stay in touch. Thanks, Tom.
Bye.